When a man returns from a business trip and begins to feel an excruciating pain in his head, his wife urges him to go to the hospital. Once there, the doctor examines his forehead more closely and suddenly shouts, "Oh God, no." Upon discovering the shocking cause of the pain, James Carter clenched his teeth the moment another sharp stab pierced through his skull. He had been enduring this throbbing, searing pain on the left side of his forehead for 3 days. He had never experienced a headache like this before, not even a migraine, and he was reaching the end of his ability to cope. Nothing, absolutely nothing, seemed to bring relief, not even the slightest bit. At first, he chalked it up to exhaustion from the trip, dehydration, and everyday stress, but after several days with no improvement, he had to admit it might be a migraine. He'd never had one before. But if this really was what it felt like, he never wanted to go through it again. He tried everything recommended for migraines, lying in a dark room, using cold compresses on his head, drinking plenty of water, and resting, yet the pain didn't ease in the slightest. That's when he started to get scared. What kind of migraine makes you feel like the skin on your head is moving? James genuinely believed he was losing his mind. He knew his skin couldn't move, and yet he couldn't shake that feeling. Were they hallucinations brought on by the migraine? He didn't know. And the mere thought that it could be something else terrified him. After spending entire days in bed, he finally got up with determination. He had things to take care of and couldn't stay there any longer. When he looked in the mirror, he was shocked by how awful he looked. Unsteadily, he made his way down to the kitchen, enduring the worst stabbing pain imaginable in his head and thinking he could faint at any moment. In the kitchen, he leaned over the sink, gripping the edges tightly to stay upright. For a moment, his vision blurred and sweat dripped down his forehead. He wasn't sure whether he should sit down for fear of passing out or stay standing at the sink in case he vomited. "James, you're scaring me," his wife Laura said as she approached. "You need to see a doctor." At first, Laura had accepted the idea that he might have just caught a minor virus or was simply worn out from his work trip. But now, seeing him like this, she wasn't so sure. He looked terrible. During those days, she had been sleeping in the guest room to avoid catching whatever he had. James had kept his room dark, so she hadn't truly seen how bad he looked. But now, in daylight, he looked like something out of a horror movie. James exhaled heavily. "I don't need a doctor, Laura. His words were cut short when a burning pain shot through his scalp again. He grabbed the nearest chair and collapsed into it. "Can I at least check your head?" she asked. James nodded, not very convinced. What could she expect to see? A migraine doesn't show physical signs, but he didn't have the strength to argue. He closed his eyes while she began gently feeling around his head, parting his hair. Suddenly, she pressed lightly on his forehead, and a sharp pain shot through him again. He nearly pushed her hand away on reflex, but stopped when he heard her scream. "What is that?" James turned sharply, which only made him dizzier. "What?" he repeated, expecting to see Laura crouched beside him, but she had already pulled back, eyes wide in horror. "James, I felt a lump, and I swear, it moved," she said in a low voice. He froze. "It moved." Laura hesitated for a moment, then reached out again and touched his forehead with her fingertips. "There's something under your skin." James ran to the bathroom mirror, pulled his hair aside, and his stomach turned. He could see a small, swollen lump protruding from his forehead. But no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't detect any movement. Still, just knowing Laura had felt something moving inside made him dizzy with anxiety. He remembered all those times lying in bed when he had the strange sensation that his skin was shifting. A knot of panic formed in his throat. Could it be possible that, could something really be living under his skin? Laura had been right. He needed to see a doctor. But not just a general practitioner. He had to get to the hospital immediately. He fought back the wave of nausea rising in his throat. The idea that something might be lodged inside him filled him with sheer terror. He shouted to Laura that it was time to go to the hospital, and he heard her rushing to find the car keys. Whatever she had seen, or thought she had seen, had clearly shaken her deeply. In the emergency room, James shifted uncomfortably while Laura explained everything, including the moment she had seen his skin move. James kept trying to downplay it. The thought of something alive under his skin was unbearable. The doctor frowned as he examined the lump with gloved hands. "You say this pain has been going on for 3 days?" Dr. Grayson asked. James nodded. "Yes, and it's getting worse. It feels like something is gnawing at me from the inside." The doctor turned to the nurse with a grave expression. "Have you traveled recently?" "Yes," James replied. "I got back from Brazil a couple of weeks ago. I was in the Amazon region for work." Grayson's frown deepened. He asked if James had noticed any insect bites. James said he'd had a few mosquito bites, but nothing major. On his trips to remote areas, he always made sure to get his vaccinations and take proper precautions. Until now, that had worked just fine, but the doctor's questions made him wonder if maybe he hadn't been careful enough, and that irritated him. He ran a hand through his hair and winced as another sharp pain struck his forehead. Dr. Grayson sighed. "Well, The good news is, I don't see any movement under the skin right now, but I need to run a scan to figure out what's going on. He went on to explain that there appeared to be a type of bite on the head, which could explain the swelling, but not the severity of the pain James was describing. Half an hour later, Dr. Grayson sat in front of the illuminated screen, reviewing the results of James's CT scan. At first, everything looked normal, but when he zoomed in, he spotted something, a dark, elongated shape just beneath the skin. He frowned, then suddenly stood up and rushed back to James. He brushed aside the hair from James's forehead and carefully felt the swollen area. A wave of revulsion hit his stomach. "Oh God, no," he shouted, yanking his hand back. A chill ran down his spine. He turned to the nurse. "Prep him for surgery, right now." James and Laura looked at each other, horror written all over their faces. What had the doctor seen to react like that? After a moment, Dr. Grayson composed himself and gave them an explanation, but it was far from reassuring. Laura had been right. Something was moving under James's skin. A minor procedure would be needed to remove it. Minutes later, James was lying on a stretcher as Dr. Grayson finished preparing for the small intervention. "I need you to stay completely still," the doctor said. He administered a local anesthetic so James wouldn't feel any pain, but staying perfectly still was crucial. James swallowed nervously. "Just tell me what it is. Once it's out." The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Grayson made a small incision in the area of the lump. As soon as the tip of the scalpel broke the skin, something seemed to twitch under the wound. The doctor gently pressed on the area, trying to coax it out, but then the thing suddenly retreated deeper inside. Grayson's heart began to race. Whatever it was, it had withdrawn. He quickly grabbed a pair of forceps, widened the incision slightly, and carefully inserted the tool. A liquid oozed from the opening, and James felt a warm, wet sensation on his forehead. And then it happened. As the doctor maneuvered the forceps, a thick, long, writhing body began to emerge partially from the wound. The doctor recoiled, nearly dropping the instrument. The thing squirmed violently, its segmented body visibly pulsating. The doctor's eyes went wide. "Oh my God," he exclaimed, stepping back. James, only half conscious from the sedatives, murmured, What is it?" The nurse let out a stifled gasp, choking back a gasp. The doctor tried to regain his composure. "I need suction and saline, now. And James, don't move." It was no easy task. James was on the verge of panic, hearing the horrified reactions of the doctor and nurse. Dr. Grayson gave a strong tug, and James felt a strange pulling sensation in his head. He was desperate to know what was going on, but he had no choice but to trust the surgeon. A sickening sound filled the room, and with a final pop, whatever had been inside James's head came out. He saw the nurse holding a small tray where the thing landed. He couldn't quite make out its shape, but just knowing something had been pulled from his own head overwhelmed him. "We're going to suture the wound now," the doctor announced. "Stay calm, I'll explain everything afterward." Once the procedure was finished, James and Laura waited in Dr. Grayson's office. James had a couple of stitches in his forehead and a huge sense of relief. He knew that once the anesthetic wore off, the pain would finally ease. Dr. Grayson returned with a container similar to the one used during the procedure and placed it where they could both see it. He hesitated a moment. "I believe this is an insect larva that burrowed into your scalp." Laura stifled a scream. "Oh my God." James felt his heart race. He shut his eyes and took a deep breath to keep from throwing up. "Something actually lived inside my head. For weeks." The doctor nodded. "We've seen cases like this in people returning from tropical regions. Although it's rare for them to burrow this deep, that's why it was critical to remove it quickly." Still dazed, James asked, "What exactly is it?" Dr. Grayson exhaled. "A human botfly larva. It had probably been in there for several weeks." Laura covered her mouth, horrified. James let out a shaky breath and dared to glance at the disgusting larva, thick-bodied and grotesque. The idea that it had been moving around inside his head while he thought he had a migraine, and to think, when Laura had insisted she saw something move, he hadn't believed her. Now the proof was sitting right in front of him in a sealed container. He thought back to his business trip. He always took every possible precaution. He was sure he'd come back from the Amazon with nothing more than a few mosquito bites. But one of those mosquitoes had brought this unwelcome passenger. His stomach churned again. Dr. Grayson continued explaining, though James could barely focus. He caught something about how, if they'd waited any longer, the larva could have caused a brain infection, but in his mind, the only image that kept replaying was that of the parasite under his skin. He collapsed into a chair, gently pressing at his temples to avoid touching the stitches. "This is too much to take in," he finally said. Laura gently took his hand, but he saw tears welling in her eyes. If it hadn't been for her, James might have waited several more days to see a doctor. And if it hadn't been removed in time, he might not have been the only one living in his body, a terrifying thought. Dr. Grayson reassured them that things like this do happen, although rarely. He said James had followed the correct precautions for insect protection, but that nature always finds a way. That gave James some slight comfort, but he still thought about his future business trips with apprehension. He definitely didn't want to relive that nightmare. 2 weeks later, James sat on the porch, enjoying the evening breeze. The scar on his forehead was healing nicely. Once the anesthetic wore off, he had felt the relief he'd longed for, and each day since, he had improved little by little. He still hadn't fully come to terms with having had a botfly larva in his head, causing him such terrible pain, but the horrifying images were finally starting to fade. Laura sat beside him, handing him a beer. For the first time in weeks, they had a normal conversation, no talk of headaches or strange creatures. They felt like they were returning to their old life. Since the hospital, Laura had been constantly checking in on him and cleaning the house from top to bottom, afraid of finding something similar. James, for his part, asked to skip business travel for a while. He wasn't quitting forever, but he needed time to recover from the trauma. He smiled at Laura, feeling incredibly lucky. If she hadn't checked his head, they might have taken much longer to discover the cause. What would have happened if the larva had kept growing inside him? It was a thought he preferred not to dwell on. What a terrifying story. Did you know a botfly larva could do something like this? Do you know of even stranger insect bite stories? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching this video, and we'll see you in the next one.